Hey friends, glad you're here at Marvel Harry. We've cooked up something special. What if Tony Stark adopted Harry and JARVIS detected unlimited magic core, making him Iron Sorcerer Supreme? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Boy in the Cupboard. The gala had been Pepper's idea, not the gala itself that had been a Stark Industries obligation, a black tie fundraiser for some tech literacy non-profit that Tony had agreed to sponsor 18 months ago, and then completely forgotten about until Pepper appeared in his workshop doorway at 5:45 p.m. holding a garment bag and wearing an expression that suggested consequences. He'd gone. He'd smiled at the right people, said the wrong things to 3 senators, accidentally started a bidding war over a prototype Stark pad that wasn't supposed to be on display, and then slipped out a side entrance at 10:30 with a glass of Macallan he hadn't finished and a headache building behind his left eye. Happy was waiting with the car. They were in London, the British leg of a 3-city tour that Pepper had also organised, and Tony had also half ignored, and the streets were quiet in the way London got quiet after midnight, that particular hush that felt older than the buildings themselves. Tony sat in the back seat watching the streetlights scroll past, and finishing the whiskey and thinking about nothing in particular, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. "Sir," Happy said from the front, "bit of a traffic situation on Victoria, I'll take the long way." "Fine." The long way took them through a residential neighborhood Tony didn't recognize, rows of identical semi-detached houses with tidy hedges and identical doorsteps, the kind of English suburb that looked like it had been assembled from a catalogue of English suburbs. Tony watched it pass without interest, then JARVIS spoke through his earpiece. "Boss, I'm reading an anomalous energy signature." "Approximately 40 meters to your left." Tony sat up. "Define anomalous." "I am having difficulty doing that, which is itself the anomaly. The signature doesn't match any entry in the Stark database, any known power source, any biological marker I have on file. It's..." JARVIS paused. JARVIS did not pause. "It's not behaving like data, I understand." "Happy, stop the car." Happy stopped the car. Tony stepped out onto a pavement that smelled like cut grass and old rain, and stood very still, letting JARVIS triangulate. The suit wasn't with him, he hadn't brought it to the gala, another of Pepper's conditions, but he had the earpiece and the watch that housed a stripped-down version of the interface, which was enough. "The house," JARVIS said, "number 4. There's a subsection of the ground floor structurally consistent with a storage cupboard beneath the staircase. The signature is emanating from there. Number 4 Privet Drive had its lights off. It was nearly 11 at night. The garden was precisely maintained, the car in the driveway new and clean, the house exactly like every other house on the street, except for whatever JARVIS was hearing inside it that he couldn't name." Tony stood at the garden gate for a moment, then he opened it and walked up the path. He knocked on the door, nothing. He knocked again, louder, and heard movement, something shuffling awake, and then the porch light snapped on and a large man in a dressing gown opened the door with the particular expression of someone who had been righteously asleep and found this personally offensive. "What in the... do you have any idea what time?" "Tony Stark," Tony said. He held up the watch, which displayed the Stark Industries logo on its face because he'd had JARVIS set it up that way precisely for situations requiring rapid credibility. "I'm getting an unusual energy reading from your property. I need to check it." The large man, Vernon, Tony would learn later, Vernon Dursley, a name that suited him like a badly fitted suit, stared at him with small, suspicious eyes. "Energy reading from my house." "From under your stairs specifically." Something moved across Vernon Dursley's face then, not confusion. Tony had spent his adult life reading people in boardrooms and press conferences, and he knew the difference between a person who didn't understand something and a person who understood it perfectly well and was hoping you didn't. "This was the second thing. There's nothing under the stairs," Dursley said. JARVIS, Tony said quietly. "The signature just spiked, boss. Whatever it is, it reacted to your voice." Tony looked at the man in the doorway for a long, flat second. Then he said very quietly and very clearly, "I'd like you to step aside. You can't just..." "I can, actually. But I'm being polite about it. That window is closing." Something in Tony's voice, the particular register of a man who had stared down senators, defense contractors, an AI that had tried to end the world and Pepper Potts before her morning coffee, made Vernon Dursley step back. Tony walked in. The cupboard door was under the staircase, small and slightly crooked, with a latch on the outside. A latch on the outside. Tony crouched in front of it, and his watch pulsed with a soft blue light, and JARVIS said very quietly, "The signature is right there, boss. Whatever it is, it's approximately 3 feet tall, and its core temperature is slightly elevated. It's scared." Tony opened the latch and pulled the door. Inside, in the dark, on a small cot with a thin blanket and a broken toy soldier and nothing else, sat a child. He was small for whatever age he was. Tony would find out later he was 4, with a mop of black hair that went in every direction at once and eyes that were startling green even in the dark. and a pair of glasses that were held together at one hinge with what appeared to be Scotch tape. There was a bruise on his arm, a fading one, the kind that went yellow-green at the edges when it was nearly done. The child looked at Tony with an expression of extreme wariness and zero surprise, which was the most heartbreaking thing Tony had ever seen. "Hi," Tony said. "Hello," said the child, very careful, very quiet. "What's your name?" A pause. "Harry." Tony looked at Harry. Harry looked at Tony. Behind him, Tony could hear Vernon Dursley beginning something, a protest, an explanation, an excuse, and Tony held up one hand without turning around, which shut it off at the source. "Harry," Tony said, "would you like to come out of there?" Harry considered this with the seriousness of a diplomat weighing a treaty. Then he nodded once and climbed out of the cupboard on his own, standing up straight in the hallway in a pair of too large pajamas and socks with a hole in the left toe, looking at Tony with those green eyes like he was trying to decide something important. "JARVIS," Tony said softly, "are you getting all of this?" "Every bit," JARVIS said. "And boss, the signature is extraordinary. It's not a radiation source, it's not electromagnetic, it's something else entirely. It's him. It's coming from him, from his, I want to say core, but I don't have the framework for that word in this context. Whatever he is unlike anything in my database." "Yeah," Tony said, looking at Harry, "I'm getting that." He straightened up and turned to face Vernon Dursley, who had gone a particular shade of red that suggested an impending medical event. Tony looked at him for a long moment, at the expensive television visible in the living room, at the pictures on the wall of a blonde boy in various stages of delighted childhood, at the complete and total absence of Harry in any of them. "Who is he?" Tony asked. "My nephew," Dursley said, with the enthusiasm of a man admitting to something he'd have preferred to keep quiet. "My wife's sister's boy. We took him in out of the goodness of your cupboard," Tony said. "Right. Who has legal custody?" Dursley blinked. "Well, we do, there's no one else. His parents died in a car crash." JARVIS pulled the birth record. "Already running," JARVIS said. "Harry James Potter. Parents listed as James Charles Potter and Lily Evans Potter, deceased October 31st, 1981. The car crash story doesn't match. The official record has cause of death listed as unexplained. The paperwork trail is remarkably sparse for a child custody arrangement, boss. It looks like someone wanted it that way." "Someone," Tony repeated. "Someone careful and institutional and operating outside normal governmental channels." Tony filed that away. He crouched down in front of Harry again, who was still standing in the hallway with the dignity of someone who had learned very early to take up as little space as possible. "Harry, how long have you been sleeping in that cupboard?" Harry thought about it with that devastating seriousness. "Always," he said. The word hit Tony somewhere behind the sternum. "Okay," Tony said. He stood up. He looked at Vernon Dursley with an expression that Pepper had once described as his "the board meeting is over and you lost" face. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking Harry, tonight. My lawyers will be in contact Monday morning, and they will make this very easy for you by making it extremely clear that fighting them will make things very hard for you. Do you understand me? You can't just take." "I am Tony Stark," Tony said, with a pleasantness so complete it functioned as a threat. "I can do quite a lot of things. This particular thing I am doing right now." He looked down at Harry. "Do you want to bring anything?" Harry looked back at the cupboard, then at Tony. "No," he said. Tony took his hand, small fingers, cold from the night, gripping his with a trust that felt entirely unearned and entirely real, and walked back out into the London night. Happy was still at the car. He looked at Tony and then at the small child and opened his mouth, and then closed it again, which was one of the things Tony appreciated most about Happy Hogan. They got in the car. "Boss," JARVIS said, as Happy pulled away from Privet Drive without being asked. "What are you doing?" "I'm figuring that out," Tony said. Harry sat beside him on the leather seat, not leaning against him, not quite, but close. He fell asleep somewhere around the M4. He slept with his glasses still on, one hand curled near his face, and JARVIS murmured in Tony's ear the entire way back to the hotel, "The signature is stable, it's rhythmic. It's almost like a heartbeat, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever measured." Pepper was awake. Of course she was. It was midnight, they had an early flight, and Pepper Potts did not sleep until her next day was organized, which was why she was sitting at the suite's desk in her hotel bathrobe with a tablet and a glass of water when Tony came through the door carrying a sleeping 4-year-old. She looked up. She looked at the child, she looked at Tony. "I can explain," Tony said. "Can you?" "There was a cupboard, under some stairs, and there was a kid in it, Pep, with a bruise and broken glasses, and he said he'd always slept in it. Just like that, always, like it was the most obvious thing. And JARVIS is reading this energy signature off him that he literally cannot categorize, and Tony stopped. He looked at Harry asleep against his shoulder, completely out, slack-faced and soft the way children went when they finally felt safe. "I couldn't leave him." Pepper was quiet for a long moment. She set down her tablet. She stood up, walked over and looked at Harry very carefully. Then she reached out and very gently took his glasses off so they weren't pressing into his face, folded them and set them on the side table. "Okay," she said. "Okay. We'll sort out the legal side Monday. Call Carlson, he still owes you from the Zurich thing. And get me his birth certificate." She moved back toward the desk. "He'll need clothes in the morning. I'll have something sent over." Tony stared at her. "You're not going to ask me if I'm sure?" Pepper looked up. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Then I'm not going to ask." She picked up the tablet again. "Put him on the bed, Tony. He's going to have a crick in his neck if you stand there holding him all night." Tony laid Harry on the hotel bed, pulled the duvet over him, and stood there for a moment looking at him the way he looked at new tech, with that particular mix of uncertainty and excitement, and the deeply uncomfortable feeling that something had just changed the fundamental shape of his life. "JARVIS," he said quietly. "Still here, boss." "What is he?" "I don't know yet," JARVIS said. "But I intend to find out." It took 8 months for the adoption to be finalized, 4 lawyers, 1 very confused family court judge, a call from someone at MI6 who wanted to know why Tony Stark was filing custody paperwork for a child whose records didn't quite exist right, and a man in a purple suit who appeared at the Malibu house uninvited one Tuesday afternoon and introduced himself as Albus Dumbledore. Tony had him removed from the property. The man appeared again on Wednesday and Thursday. On Friday, Tony met him at the gate wearing an earpiece and a politely immovable expression and said, "Whoever you are and whatever you want, the answer is no. The adoption is going through. The boy is staying. You can sue me or you can walk away, and those are your 2 options." Dumbledore had looked at him with those blue eyes that were either kind or calculating depending on the light, and said, "You don't understand what he is, Mr. Stark." "I'm working on it," Tony said. "That's actually one of my favorite things, working on something I don't understand yet." He paused. "Who are you?" "Someone who has watched over Harry since before he was born." "Watched over, sure, from a distance, very watched over." "Really nailed that one." Tony looked at him steadily. "Did you know about the cupboard?" The faintest shift in that calm face. "Enough." "Goodbye," Tony said and went back inside. JARVIS had flagged the man's energy signature the moment he appeared at the gate, something hovering around him, the same category of unclassifiable as Harry's but older and more layered. Tony added it to the file he'd been building for 8 months, the file labeled Magic, which he'd started as a joke and stopped being a joke approximately 48 hours after that night in London. Because the thing about Harry was this: lights flickered when he was upset, objects moved. The coffee mug he'd been reaching for on the kitchen counter slid 2 inches toward him before he touched it, and when Tony rewound the footage and watched it in slow motion, there was no vibration, no air current, no mechanical explanation. JARVIS measured a micro spike in Harry's biometric signature at the precise moment the cup moved, 0.3 of a second of something that registered on instruments designed to detect arc reactor output and registered as more. Tony built a sensor array. Harry thought it was a science project and helped him calibrate it, which was how Tony discovered that Harry was one of the most naturally analytical 4-year-olds he had ever encountered, which admittedly was not a large sample pool, but still. "What does this do?" Harry would ask, pointing at components with those green eyes sharp behind his new glasses. "It listens," Tony told him. "For what?" "I'm not sure yet, something new." Harry had accepted this with the equanimity of a child who had learned early that the world contained unexplained things, and the best response was curiosity rather than fear. He was like that about most things, quiet and watchful at first, then suddenly and completely engaged. He attached to Pepper faster than anyone, which Tony chose not to be jealous about. He and JARVIS had long conversations through the house speakers that Tony sometimes listened to from the next room. JARVIS explaining how photosynthesis worked, Harry explaining in return that plants felt happy in sunlight, which he knew because he could tell, which JARVIS filed carefully under data requiring further analysis. By age 6, Harry could levitate small objects intentionally, not always reliably, not with great control, but when he concentrated, when he sat cross-legged on the workshop floor and focused the way Tony focused when he was building something, things moved. Glass filled with water slid across surfaces. Tony's tools rearranged themselves overnight. The arc reactor prototype on the workbench hummed 3 frequencies higher than its calibrated output whenever Harry sat near it. "It likes you," Tony told him. Harry cocked his head. "Do machines like things?" JARVIS does. "That's true," JARVIS said from the ceiling. "I find Harry's proximity consistently pleasant. Your energy signature interfaces with my sensor arrays in a way that is, mathematically speaking, harmonious." Harry looked pleased in the contained way he had, the way that was still learning it was allowed to be pleased. "I like you too, JARVIS. Noted and appreciated," JARVIS said, with a warmth that Tony was fairly certain he'd programmed in as a function, and which had long since become something more than a function. Tony started teaching him to read schematics at 6. He was fluent in them by 7. He understood basic quantum mechanics at 8, not fully, not yet, but he understood the shape of it, the fundamental weirdness, and he approached it with the same equanimity he brought to magic. Here is a thing the universe does that doesn't follow the rules you thought were rules. Interesting. They rebuilt a Stark Industries drone together when Harry was 8.5, a small one, recreational grade, and Harry soldered 3 of the connections himself, the tip of his tongue between his teeth, the ambient temperature in the workshop dropping 2 degrees the way it always did when he was completely focused. "You concentrate in cold," Tony told him once. Harry looked at his hands. "I didn't know that. I've been tracking it for 2 years. It's like your body redirects energy, thermal, kinetic, inward. When you're really locked in, you're pulling from the environment." He pulled up the data on the workshop screen. "Look," Harry looked. He was 9 by then, glasses still slightly too big, wearing a Stark Industries hoodie that came to his knees. He studied the temperature graphs with an expression that Tony recognized as his own thinking face, which still startled him sometimes, not because Harry looked like him, because he didn't, but because he thought like him. "Lateral and deep at the same time, so it's a draw," Harry said. "What, like a reactor draw? The core pulls what it needs." He traced the graph with one finger. "Is that what JARVIS measured that first night?" Tony had told him by then. Not everything. Harry was 9, not 39, but the shape of it. "I found you because something in you lit up in JARVIS's sensors, and I couldn't walk away from something I didn't understand." He'd made it scientific because it was scientific, and also because Harry received information scientifically. He could feel things about it later, in his own time. "JARVIS measured something he couldn't categorize," Tony said. "He still can't fully, but the best framework we've got is that your core, whatever it is, doesn't have an upper limit we can detect." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Does that scare you?" "No," Tony said, and meant it completely. "It's the coolest thing I've ever measured, and I've measured some genuinely cool things." Harry's mouth curved. Not a big smile, still careful with those, still working on it, but real. "Okay," he said, and went back to the graph. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in July when Harry was 11, and it was addressed in green ink to Mr. H. Potter Stark, the workshop, Stark Tower, New York, which Tony found specific enough to be unsettling. Harry turned it over in his hands, read the return address, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and looked up at Tony with an expression that contained equal parts curiosity and the particular dryness he'd picked up from spending his formative years around Pepper. "Witchcraft and Wizardry," he said. "I've been expecting something like this," Tony said, which was true. "Open it." The letter was formal, old-fashioned, printed on what appeared to be actual parchment, and sealed with an actual wax seal depicting an actual crest with 4 animals on it, and invited Mr. H. Potter Stark to attend Hogwarts School beginning September 1st for the first year of a 7-year magical education, and listed a supply list that included items such as 1 wand and 1 cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, and what Tony privately felt was an unreasonable number of robes. "A school," Harry said, "a magic school, a British magic school, specifically at a castle in Scotland, I think." Tony had already had JARVIS running on it. JARVIS, what do we know? Established roughly 990 AD, exact location magically concealed, but geographic triangulation based on known alumni historical records suggests the Scottish Highlands. No digital footprint whatsoever, genuinely impressive, actually. The magical concealment appears to be a field phenomenon I've been correlating with the same category of energy signature as Harry's. Whoever built it was working with the same fundamental source. Harry was still looking at the letter. "Do you want me to go?" The question wasn't aimed anywhere in particular. Tony took a moment. "I want you to do what you want," he said, "but I think you should go. Not because some 1,000-year-old institution sent you a letter, but because," he gestured at Harry, at the space around Harry, at the accumulated data of 11 years. "You've hit the ceiling of what I can teach you. On the science side, honestly, you're going to need about 6 more years before you catch up with me. On the magic side, you passed me about 5 years ago. I don't know what I don't know about that. They might." Harry thought about this. "I don't want to leave." "You're not leaving, you're going to school." "There's a difference." Tony paused. "Also, I'm going to the open day. They can't stop me. I've checked and they definitely cannot stop me." Harry laughed then, fully, unexpectedly, the laugh that still had a note of surprise in it, like he was never quite sure humor was allowed. "There isn't an open day. There will be." There wasn't. But Tony wrote a letter, on actual paper, because JARVIS had established that electronic communication didn't reach wherever Hogwarts was, a letter of 4 pages addressed to Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, which outlined in precise legal and scientific language Tony's requirements for Harry's attendance. Full curriculum disclosure, direct communication line to Tony Stark and Pepper Potts Stark at all times regardless of whatever anti-muggle protocols the school maintained, complete medical records access, and a standing invitation for Tony to visit at will. He also included, as an appendix, JARVIS's preliminary analysis of Harry's magical energy output, which ran to 17 pages of data that no one at Hogwarts would be able to replicate with a quill, and which made the point more eloquently than anything Tony could have written. The reply came 4 days later. It was signed by Dumbledore and it was polite and carefully worded, and it agreed to essentially nothing. Tony read it twice. Then he wrote back, and this letter was 2 pages and significantly more direct, and the final paragraph began with the words, "If we cannot reach an agreement, I will be seeking an injunction through the ICW Muggle Liaison Office that I have just discovered exists, and my lawyers are very good and have a lot of time." The reply to that was a meeting. Dumbledore came to Stark Tower in August, 2 weeks before term. He sat in the living room and accepted tea from Pepper and looked at Harry with an expression of something Tony couldn't quite name, not guilt exactly, but the cousin of it, and said, "It is good to see you well, Harry." "Thank you," Harry said politely from the armchair across from him, with his ankles crossed and his hands on the armrests and the ease of a person who was entirely comfortable in the space he occupied. He'd grown into himself steadily over the last 3 years, still lean, still dark-haired, still those green eyes, but there was a quality to him now, a settled confidence that wasn't arrogance because it didn't need anything from anyone. He was just there fully and completely. "I'm told you were involved in placing me with the Dursleys." Dumbledore's expression shifted. "I believed it was the safest." "Was it?" Harry said, and his voice was perfectly even, not angry, not wounded. "Just curious the way he got when he was examining data, because the data suggests it wasn't particularly safe." "It was a cupboard under stairs." Silence. "I've read about blood wards," Harry continued. "The theory that maternal sacrifice creates protective magic tied to a blood relative's home. JARVIS has been working through it." He glanced up at the ceiling with the fond, unconscious reflex he'd developed in childhood. "Can you confirm that was the rationale?" Dumbledore looked at the ceiling briefly, as though trying to locate JARVIS in it. "The wards were intended to." "I understand the intention," Harry said. "I'm asking if it worked empirically." Another pause. Tony, sitting at the end of the sofa, said nothing. He'd told Harry he could run this one. "The wards would have required your continued residence," Dumbledore said carefully. "Right, so they failed the moment I left," Harry nodded. "Which means whatever you were protecting me from, whoever, has had access to me for the last 7 years. He tilted his head. "I'm not upset. I'm pointing out that the plan had a structural failure you may not have accounted for." Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment with those blue eyes that Tony had spent years cataloguing and had finally classified as believing their own story, which was the most dangerous kind. Then he looked at Tony. "You've raised an extraordinary young man," he said, and he meant it. "I know," Tony said. "There are things about Harry's history, his significance in our world, that we should discuss. He is known." "He has been known since he was a baby," Tony said. "I'm aware of the prophecy." "JARVIS has been thorough." He leaned forward. "Here's my position on the prophecy. My position is that Harry is 11 years old and he is going to school to learn magic and have friends and figure out who he is, and no prophecy written before he was born gets to determine any of those things. Are we aligned on that?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "Voldemort is not dead," Harry said. "I know, not fully." JARVIS tracked the magical signature discrepancy. He said it casually, the way Tony said, "I already know how this works," when someone tried to explain his own patents to him. "When I'm ready, we'll address it. Right now I'm going to learn to fly a broomstick and find out if Hogwarts has a decent chemistry lab." Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, and Tony watched something shift in the old man's face. Not a defeat exactly, more like the moment a chess player realizes the board isn't arranged the way they thought it was, that several pieces have moved while they weren't watching. "Very well," Dumbledore said after a moment. "I will instruct the staff to accommodate your particular," he paused, "circumstances." "Great," Harry said. "Also, I'm bringing Stark pads. Enchanted signal blocked or not, JARVIS has built a closed-circuit version that'll function without Wi-Fi. I'm not going dark for 10 months. That is," Dumbledore seemed to search for words, "non-negotiable," Tony said pleasantly. They did the Diagon Alley shopping the week before September. Tony wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, which Pepper told him accomplished nothing since he was still Tony Stark in a baseball cap and sunglasses, and he said that wasn't the point was the gesture. Harry was unimpressed by Gringotts. "It's a bank, Dad, I've seen banks," but went very quiet in Ollivander's and stood in the middle of the wand shop with the slightly unfocused expression he got when he was feeling something he hadn't put a name to yet. "Mr. Ollivander moved around him in a slow circle without saying a word, pulling boxes, discarding them before he even offered them, faster and faster. "Remarkable," the wandmaker said finally very quietly. He wasn't looking at his shelves anymore, he was looking at Harry. "The cores I have here are hesitant, they can feel it." "Feel what?" Harry asked. "You." Ollivander reached for a box at the very back of the highest shelf, one that had been there long enough to have a layer of dust on it. I made this 15 years ago. I couldn't find a witch or wizard it suited. Now I understand why. It was waiting. He opened the box. The wand inside was 11 inches, carved from elder wood, with a core that he described in a murmur as thunderbird tail feather, an anomalous specimen that produced twice the output of any other in my collection. He held it out. Go on. Harry picked it up. The shop didn't explode, which Tony had been quietly prepared for. What happened instead was quieter and stranger. Every wand in every box on every shelf resonated simultaneously, a long low hum that raised the hair on Tony's arms, and the wand maker made a sound like someone who had been waiting a very long time and had finally seen the thing they'd been waiting for. I knew your parents, Ollivander said softly. Your father's wand was mahogany, your mother's was willow. 10 1/4 swishy, remarkable for charms. He looked at Harry over Harry's shoulder. Hers was the one that mattered in the end. Harry nodded. His jaw was set in the line he had when something landed, and he was choosing to carry it rather than put it down. Tony watched him and didn't say anything and was there. They got cauldrons, robes. Harry submitted to this with dignified resignation. Books. Harry's eyes moved over the shelves in flourish and blots with a hunger that Tony recognized as himself in the MIT library at 17, and he said, get what you want, and Harry got significantly more than the curriculum required. They had ice cream at Fortescue's because JARVIS had told them in advance that it was the thing to do, and Harry ate a scoop of something green that tasted inexplicably of thunderstorms and looked more animated than he had all day. Good, Tony asked. It's weird, Harry said. I like it. On the train platform at King's Cross, at the barrier between 9 and 10, Tony stood with Harry and looked at the wall that was not a wall and thought about how often in his life a wall had turned out to be not a wall. About the first arc reactor, about the cave in Afghanistan, about the first Iron Man flight when the suit hit the upper atmosphere, and the oxygen lines began icing and something inside him said keep going. You ready? Tony said. Harry was already looking at the barrier with that quiet, total attention. Then he turned and looked at Tony, and he was 11 years old and about to walk through a wall into a world that had already decided who he was before he had a chance to decide for himself, and his eyes were very green and very clear. JARVIS, he said to the small StarkPad device tucked in his jacket pocket, the closed-circuit one, which JARVIS inhabited the way he inhabited everything, keep monitoring. Always, JARVIS said. Have a good first day, Harry. Harry smiled. Then he walked through the wall. Tony stood on the muggle side for a moment. Then he shoved his hands in his pockets and looked up at the departure board and thought, God, I hope they're ready for him. They weren't. They couldn't be. But that was their problem. He turned and walked back toward Happy and the car and the rest of the world, and behind him, somewhere through a wall that was not a wall, the Hogwarts Express pulled out of the station carrying one 11-year-old with a magical core that JARVIS still couldn't put a ceiling on, a brand new wand of Elder and Thunderbird feather, 7 books beyond his curriculum, and a closed-circuit AI companion in his pocket. Tony smiled the whole drive back. The sorting ceremony began at 8 in the evening on September 1st, in the Great Hall of Hogwarts Castle, under enchanted ceilings that mirrored a sky full of early autumn stars. Harry had been sorted before, not literally, but in the way that mattered. He had been sorted by the accumulation of 11 years of himself. He knew who he was. He sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall, severe, watchful, the most immediately competent adult he'd encountered at Hogwarts so far, lowered the sorting hat onto his head. It was old. He could feel that immediately, the way he could feel old things, the layered weight of centuries of accumulated decision and intent, and it stirred on his head with the slow waking of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years and found nothing surprising. Then it found him. The pause was long enough that students began to whisper. Well, the hat said, in a voice that was felt rather than heard, inside the specific silence behind his eyes. I have to say this is new. I get that a lot, Harry thought. Your mind is extraordinary. Ravenclaw would suit you, the depth of thought alone. But there's also considerable bravery, and you're more cunning than you know, and your loyalty runs deep as bedrock. Another pause. I could put you anywhere. I have never been able to say that and mean it quite so completely. So where do I go? The hat seemed to consider. Tell me, what do you want, Harry Potter Stark? Harry thought about it, about the workshop floor and schematics at 6, and cold air when he concentrated, and the wand humming in his hand, and the thunderstorm ice cream, and the way Pepper had taken his glasses off so they wouldn't press into his face. About what he was here to do. I want to learn everything, he thought, and I want to be there for people who need it. And I don't want anyone telling me what I am before I've had the chance to find out. The hat laughed, or did the thing that ancient magical artifacts did that was closest to laughing, and then it called out, in a voice the whole hall could hear, Gryffindor. The table on the left exploded with noise. Harry handed the hat back to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression that, if you knew what to look for, was approximately 5 degrees warmer than how she'd looked at anyone else. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and across the hall he caught the eye of a girl with wild brown hair, already seated, Gryffindor 2, watching him with bright, calculating, intensely curious eyes, and she gave him a small nod of the kind that meant, "I've heard of you." "I intend to form my own opinion," he nodded back, and in his pocket JARVIS sent a single-line text to the closed-circuit display, "Gryffindor, interesting. I calculated 34% probability. I may need to adjust my models." Harry read it under the table and didn't quite manage to keep the smile off his face. Above him, the enchanted ceiling showed the stars of early September, cold and clear and going on forever. Chapter 2, The Sorcerer's Son. The thing about Hogwarts that no one had warned Harry about was how loud it was. Not the students, though they were loud too, a constant rushing tide of voices in corridors and common rooms and the cavernous Great Hall, but the castle itself, the stones, the portraits. The staircases that moved with a grinding complaint like old joints, the ghosts who drifted through walls trailing cold and conversation. Even the torchlight was loud in a way that had nothing to do with sound, a persistent hum at the edge of sensation, magic threaded through mortar and timber and centuries of accumulated use, and Harry felt all of it, constantly, the way you felt a nearby engine through a car seat. He didn't tell anyone that for the first 2 weeks. He filed it under data and adjusted. The adjusting was easier than Hogwarts seemed to expect. He got the impression, from the way older students watched the first years navigate, from the way certain professors spoke with the careful patience of people explaining things to children, that first year was generally understood to be overwhelming. The moving staircases, the shifting corridors, the subjects that required you to accept premises the non-magical world had ruled out. Most students from wizarding families had the advantage of familiarity. Most Muggle-borns, he gathered, spent the first month in structured shock. Harry spent the first week building a complete internal map of the castle's energy topology and wondering if the kitchens were accessible from the east corridor by the tapestry of the dancing trolls. They were, he confirmed on Thursday, and the house elves were delightful about scones. "You're not normal," Hermione Granger told him, on day 9 in the library, with the tone of someone delivering a scientific assessment rather than a critique. "No," Harry agreed without looking up from Advanced Transfiguration Theory, a practitioner's analysis, which was a fifth-year text he'd pulled because the first-year curriculum felt structural rather than substantive. "What gave it away? You answered every question in Charms yesterday, correctly, including the one Flitwick said was optional because it was second-year material." She pulled out the chair across from him with the efficiency of a person who had already decided they were sitting down and was just completing the formality. "And you did wandless color change on your quill during History of Magic. I saw it." Harry looked up. Hermione was watching him with those clever eyes and her chin slightly forward, the stance he'd noticed she took when she was committing to a position. "I was bored," he said. "History of Magic is taught by a ghost who died before the Statute of Secrecy." "He doesn't know what he doesn't know." "That's fair," Hermione said immediately, which surprised him slightly. Most people defended their initial positions longer. Binns is genuinely terrible, but that doesn't mean you should be doing wandless magic in class. It draws attention. "I know," Harry put down the book. "I'm not trying to hide it. I'm just not interested in performing below what I can do because it makes other people comfortable." Hermione stared at him, then she said, "Who raised you?" "Tony Stark, the Iron Man." "Yes, a beat." "That explains quite a lot," she said, and opened her own book with the satisfied air of someone who had resolved a puzzle. "I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. I know you answered 5 questions before breakfast. You were counting." "I count things," Harry said. "It's a habit." Hermione smiled, sudden and genuine, transforming her face from watchful to warm. "Me too," she said. "That was how that started." Potions was in the dungeons, which Harry found architecturally interesting. The lowest level of the castle had a different magical resonance than the upper floors, older and denser, like the sediment at the bottom of something deep. Professor Snape's classroom had the particular quality of a space where intense focus had been practiced for decades. The stones remembered concentration. Snape himself was interesting. Harry had done his research the way he did research on everything. The man was a former Death Eater, current spy asset for Dumbledore's side, personally complicated, professionally brilliant. The potion's mastery was real. Tony had run it through JARVIS, cross-referencing published papers, and the academic work was genuinely excellent even stripped of the name. He also, as became clear in the first 10 minutes of the first class, intended to make Harry's life difficult. "Potter," Snape said, on calling the register, pausing on the name with the weight of someone who had been waiting to use it. His black eyes moved to Harry with something complicated in them. "Our new celebrity." The class was quiet. "Professor Snape," Harry said pleasantly, "tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" It was, Harry knew from 1,000 magical herbs and fungi and 2 other texts, a question designed to embarrass. It was a third-year concept, casually deployed as a weapon, Draught of living death, Harry said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions in existence. Asphodel belongs to the lily family, which is interesting given the symbolism. Asphodel is associated with mourning in ancient tradition, wormwood with bitterness and regret. The combination produces something that suspends all vital function so completely it mimics death. The preparation is extremely sensitive to heat. Even a 2-degree variance in the third stage will invert the effect and produce something closer to a stimulant than a sedative. He paused. Though I imagine you know all of that. Snape's expression was the controlled mask of a skilled occlumens, but Harry had spent 11 years reading Tony Stark, who also used controlled expressions as armor, and he could see the microtension in the jaw. Where would you look, Snape said with dangerous quietness, if I told you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It's a calcified mass that forms as a neutralizer against certain poisons, used as a general antidote since the medieval period, though its effectiveness is specific rather than universal. The Muggle medical tradition has an analogue in activated charcoal for certain toxin scenarios, though the mechanism is different, Harry considered. Though the stomach of a goat seems like an inefficient supply chain for a school potions program. Is there a cultivation alternative? The literature suggests. That will do, Snape said very quietly. The class was very, very still. 10 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, and moved on, and the flatness in his voice suggested that this had not gone as arranged. Harry turned back to his cauldron and caught Hermione's eyes across the bench. She mouthed how and he mouthed back books, which she accepted. Behind him, he heard Ron Weasley mutter very quietly to Seamus Finnegan, "Blimey." He also heard Snape moving through the dungeon with the particular quality of someone recalibrating. He filed it away. Snape was not a simple problem. Simple problems didn't interest him anyway. October arrived and turned the grounds gold, and Harry was flying. Not metaphorically, actually flying. On a school broom he checked out from the Quidditch supply shed at 6 in the morning before anyone else was up. In the cold, clear air over the Quidditch pitch with the highlands spread out in every direction and the castle below him trailing early mist. He wasn't the fastest on a broom. He was fast instinctively, the spatial reasoning translated perfectly from his experience with Tony's drones. But what he loved about it was the sensation, the way the ambient magic of the grounds interfaced with the broom's enchantment, and how he could feel the current of it if he held very still. JARVIS, through the Stark pad in his robe pocket, was logging it. Your biometric output increases by approximately 12% at altitude, JARVIS noted. I'm cross-referencing with known magical weather effects and Lee line data. There may be a geographic component to your signature's potency. The highlands are old, Harry said, pulling a slow arc at 40 feet. The magic here goes way down. You can feel it, JARVIS said. I'm measuring it, different things, same data, philosophically interesting distinction, noted. The morning was interrupted by Marcus Flint, who appeared at 6:30 with 2 Slytherin teammates in tow, and told Harry the pitch was reserved for Slytherin practice. He said it with the specific confidence of someone accustomed to using size as an argument, blocking the broom shed with his arms crossed. Harry landed. He looked at Flint, 5th year, broad, accustomed to being the largest person in a room, and said, "Show me the booking." "What? The scheduling book?" "Madam Hooch keeps one. Show me the booking for this time slot on this date and I'll go." He tilted his head. "If you can't show me the booking, I'm going to keep flying." Flint stepped forward. His 2 companions spread slightly, the automatic geometry of a threatened posture. The temperature around Harry dropped 2 degrees, not dramatically, not with any visible effect, just dropped the way it always did when he was fully present. "I know who you are, Potter," Flint said. "Good," Harry said. "Then you know I flew for 40 minutes before you got here and I'm not particularly threatened by the current arrangement." He got back on the broom. Flint made a lunge for it, instinctive, stupid, and Harry lifted straight up without touching him, quick and clean, 15 feet in under 2 seconds, and looked down at Flint from that height with the same expression Tony used in boardrooms. "I'll be done in 20 minutes, Harry said pleasantly. "You can have it then." He flew his 20 minutes. They were still there when he landed. He handed the broom back to the shed without looking at them and walked to breakfast, and JARVIS said, "Heart rate never exceeded resting. Well done." "I wasn't scared," Harry said. "I know," JARVIS said. "That's what I mean. The troll happened on Halloween." It happened as far as Harry could reconstruct afterward, because Professor Quirrell burst into the Great Hall during the feast and announced a troll in the dungeons before collapsing with excessive theatre. And in the evacuation chaos that followed, Hermione was not in the Great Hall because she was in the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor because she'd been crying about something Ron had said, which Harry had witnessed and which he'd already added to his ongoing file of Ron. Good instincts, terrible execution. He knew she wasn't there immediately. He had a habit of knowing where people he cared about were in relation to him, the same spatial awareness he used for flying and for combat drills with Tony, and when the prefects were herding Gryffindors back to the tower, he peeled off from the group. Ron followed, less because he'd made a decision, and more because the alternative was waiting with his own conscience. "She's on the second floor," Harry said, already moving. "How do you?" "I know where people are," Harry said, which was true and which he didn't feel like explaining in detail right now. They heard the troll before they saw it. Not footsteps, the smell first, something dense and feral, and then the sound of it. Massive displacement, stone hitting stone, the groan of a creature that had no cognitive connection between itself and the objects it was destroying. It was in the corridor outside the girls' bathroom, which meant Hermione was either already past it or he heard her, a stifled sound from inside the bathroom which answered the question. Harry had read about trolls. Mountain variety, 12 feet, average magical resistance low, structural damage capacity high, threat rating elevated primarily through size and unpredictability rather than any innate magical ability. The information arranged itself in under a second, which was how his mind worked when adrenaline hit. Faster, cleaner, the data sorting itself into priority order. "Levitation charm," Ron said beside him. "We could, the club, go get a professor," Harry said. "What are you?" "Ron," Harry looked at him directly. "Get a professor, I've got this." Something in his voice, the same quality it carried when he was flying above Flint, when he was answering Snape, when he simply was, made Ron move without further argument. Harry walked around the corner. The troll was exactly as described, enormous, greyish skin like old rock, swinging a club with the random enthusiasm of something that hadn't developed preferences yet. It had noticed the bathroom door, which was vibrating in its frame from the inside, and was moving toward it with the slow inevitability of a thing that didn't understand obstacles. "Hey," Harry said. The troll turned. Small red eyes, dull and wet, fixed on him. It raised the club. Harry raised one hand. He didn't use the wand. He'd been using the wand in class because the wand was a focusing tool, and he was learning its applications, and he genuinely appreciated what it added to his precision. But here now, with the troll swinging a club the size of a small car, he felt the magic available to him, the deep ambient pull of the castle's energy in his own core, and he reached. The troll stopped. Not from any stunning spell, not from anything with a name in Standard Book of Spells Grade 1. Harry held it. Held it the way you held two hands apart, with effort, yes, but not extraordinary effort, just the effort of focus, of directing something that was already flowing. The troll's limbs locked against its body, and its small eyes showed, for the first time, something like confusion. Then he heard the bathroom door slam open and Hermione's voice. "Harry, how are you?" "Now would be a good time to move," Harry said evenly, because holding a 12-foot troll in a standing bind was not something he intended to do indefinitely. Hermione moved. She cleared the corridor, stopped, turned, and looked at Harry holding a troll immobile with his bare hand extended, and her expression went through 5 stages of scientific astonishment in under 3 seconds. Harry released the bind intentionally, cleanly, and cast a Wingardium Leviosa with his wand as the troll stumbled, lifting it clear off the floor, and then set it down with enough force to daze it, which it was, sitting in the corridor blinking, the club 3 feet away, the fight entirely gone out of it. McGonagall arrived 30 seconds later with Snape and Quirrell, the 3 of them ready for a fight that was evidently over. Quirrell made a sound when he saw the troll, and it was wrong. It was surprised but not relieved, and Harry noticed that immediately and noted it. McGonagall surveyed the scene, the seated troll. "Hermione, Harry, are you all injured?" "No, Professor," Harry said. She looked at the troll, then at Harry. The math was visible on her face. "Mr. Potter," she said carefully, "that is a mountain troll." "Yes, you are 11 years old. Also yes," he paused. "There's a third-year bind technique in Flitwick's personal bibliography. I found the reference in the library that creates immobilization through compressive field theory rather than the traditional petrificus. I adapted it. It worked." He glanced at Hermione. "Are you okay?" Hermione, who had processed things in the efficient way she had, said, "Yes, I'm fine." "That was a compressive field. The theory on that is based on Elric of Windermore's 7th treatise. I've read it. It's extremely advanced, and you did it without a wand, which is 5 points from Gryffindor," Snape said, cutting through. Everyone looked at him, for being out of the dormitory after hours. He looked at Harry with an expression that was not quite readable. "And 15 points to Gryffindor, for a pause, exceptional practical application." Quirrell hadn't said anything. He was looking at Harry with those nervous, stuttering eyes, and Harry looked back at him and thought, "I know what you are." "You don't know that I know." He filed it away. There was a time for everything. Tony came for the first weekend visit in November, because he'd told Dumbledore he was coming, and Dumbledore had said the school wasn't typically open to parental visits, and Tony had said that's not a no, and shown up at the castle gates on Saturday morning in a coat and stark pads, and happy energy like a golden retriever with a PhD. McGonagall let him in. Tony suspected she secretly respected anyone who treated rules as starting points for negotiation. They walked the grounds, Harry and Tony ate every detail of the castle with his eyes, and JARVIS processed it through the open connection, and they talked, the fast, technical shorthand they developed over years, jumping registers between personal and scientific and back without transition. Quirrell, Harry said. Yeah. JARVIS has been watching your biometric logs. Tony's voice was level, but his eyes were moving, cataloging. The spike every time you're near him is consistent. There's something on him, in him maybe. The energy signature is layered, it's got his signature and then something behind it that reads like scar tissue on a wound. Old and hostile, Voldemort, almost certainly. The castle's ambient magic destabilizes near him in a specific way. I've been tracking it. Harry paused. I'm not afraid of him. I know you're not, Tony said. That's not the same as saying we shouldn't be prepared. I've been prepared. Tony looked at him sideways. Since when? Since approximately October 5th, when I confirmed Quirrell's signature. Harry kept walking, the November grass wet under their feet. I've been working on a countermeasure, an anchoring technique, binding a hostile possessing entity to a localized field and forcing it out. The theory is solid. I've been testing the mechanics. Tony stopped walking. Harry stopped too and looked at him. You've been, Tony said slowly, developing an exorcism. Essentially, at 11, JARVIS helped. Tony looked at the sky for a moment with the expression he got when he was proud and terrified simultaneously, which Harry had seen many times and recognized as the highest form of compliment. Okay, Tony said. Talk me through the mechanics. So Harry talked him through it. They're on the grounds of Hogwarts in November with the Forbidden Forest dark at the edge of the grounds and the Black Lake still and grey beside them. The way they'd always talked, two minds around a problem, JARVIS interjecting with data points, the particular pleasure of a well-examined idea. Tony listened completely, asked 3 questions. Said, the second stage has an assumption I want to stress test. What if the host has become partially willing? What does that do to the binding field? Harry considered it. The anchor point shifts, the entity's grip is on the will rather than the body. I'd need a secondary layer, a clarity field, something that separates the host's genuine intent from the overlay. Build that in, Tony said, as a default, not a contingency. Yes, Harry thought. Also, Dad, there's a mirror. What kind of mirror? The kind that shows you what you want most. Dumbledore's got it somewhere in the castle. He moved it in September. I tracked the magical displacement. It ended up somewhere on the 3rd floor corridor. He's using it as a trap or a test or both. He paused. The stone is behind it. Tony was quiet for a moment. The Philosopher's Stone, Nicola's Flamel. Yes, JARVIS cross-referenced Flamel's known research interests, the timeline of the vault robbery at Gringotts over the summer. That was the stone, moved for safety and the kind of protections I've been sensing in the 3rd floor corridor. It's a chain of obstacle rooms, designed to stop someone without the right knowledge or power. He looked at Tony. It's also obviously designed with me in mind. Dumbledore arranged it. The mirror at the end uses your deepest desire to trap you. Anyone who wants the stone sees themselves using it. I would just see it in my pocket, apparently, because you don't want to use it. I don't need to use it, Harry said, which was different and more complete. I want to find out what the 3rd floor corridor tastes like magically. But the stone itself is just an object. He shrugged slightly. I haven't gone in, I'm watching. Tony breathed out. You're watching an active trap being set for you by a man who believes you need to be guided towards specific outcomes. Yes, and you're 11. You've mentioned my age a few times today. Tony turned to look at him fully, and there was something in his face that wasn't quite an expression. Tony had easy words for the look of a man seeing something he made that became something more than he made, and finding it overwhelming and correct. You know I trust you, Tony said. I know, and JARVIS has eyes on everything. Always, JARVIS said from Harry's pocket. Then here's what we're going to do, Tony said, shifting into the register they both recognized as building mode. I've been working on something. I haven't told you yet because I wanted it functional first. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, something that looked like a collapsed arc reactor component with new modifications. I've been building a suit. Harry looked at the device, not the standard model, Tony said. I've been running every parameter reading JARVIS has ever taken of your core output through the fabrication algorithm. The suit is designed to interface with your magical signature, channel it through the repulsors rather than dampen it, which is what standard electromagnetic shielding would do. The gauntlets are configured as focusing arrays. You'd have all the Iron Man physical capability plus the ability to direct your magic with reactor precision. He looked at Harry steadily. First prototype is ready. We'll test it in December over the holiday. Harry looked at the device for a long time, then at Tony. You built me a magic suit, Harry said. I built you a magic Iron Man suit, Tony said. There's a difference, semantically and cosmetically. Is it red? Obviously it's red with green trim. Don't argue with me, the green makes sense with your eyes. Harry laughed fully, openly, without the old hesitation, and the temperature around them did the opposite of its usual thing. It warmed briefly 2 degrees, the way it did when he was completely unguarded. The grass near their feet was suddenly, inexplicably, still green in November. JARVIS noted it quietly in his logs and said nothing about it. Some data you simply kept. The Ancient One arrived on the 22nd of November, not at Hogwarts. Stark Tower in New York, which is where Tony was when JARVIS flagged an incoming energy signature on the tower's perimeter sensors, unmistakably magical, disciplined and controlled in the way Harry's was instinctive and boundless, walking up to the front entrance in the form of a small bald woman in simple robes. She's not hostile, JARVIS said, but she is extraordinary. Her signature is the most controlled magical output I've ever measured. Everything is contained, deliberate. Tony went to the door himself. The woman looked up at him with dark, amused eyes. Tony Stark, she said, I've been meaning to visit for some time. The dimensional ripple from your boy could be felt in Camotage approximately 4 months ago. Camotage, Tony said. You can look it up after. I'm the Ancient One. I train sorcerers, masters of the mystic arts. She tilted her head. I came to assess what you have, what the boy is. He's my son, Tony said. Yes, she said, with the patience of someone used to people stating the obvious in situations where the obvious was not the point. May I come in? Tony stepped aside. She walked through Stark Tower with the slightly proprietorial air of someone assessing a new space, touching nothing, looking at everything, and JARVIS tracked her the entire time because JARVIS tracked everything. She paused in the workshop in front of the partial prototype of the Iron Sorcerer suit and looked at it for a long time. The channeling arrays in the gauntlets, she said, arc reactor power running through the focusing lattice. You're trying to give a magical conductor a precision instrument. That's basically it, Tony said. The principle is sound, she turned. His core is unlimited, Mr. Stark. I want you to understand what I mean by that. Not very large, not exceptional, unlimited. The upper bound simply is not there. She said it with the flat precision of a doctor delivering a specific diagnosis. I have trained sorcerers for centuries. The most gifted among them have what we call a deep well, a substantial but finite reservoir of magical energy. Your son has no well, he has a conduit to something that has no edge. Tony sat down on the workbench. A conduit to what? We don't have a word for it, she almost smiled, which is uncomfortable for people who deal in words. What does it mean practically? It means that the limitations on his magic are entirely about control, focus and knowledge, never about supply. He will never run out, he will only ever be limited by what he knows how to do and how precisely he can do it. She paused. He is going to need proper training, not what Hogwarts teaches. Hogwarts is craft instruction, useful but narrow. He needs dimensional theory, he needs the deeper mechanics, he needs what we teach at Camotage. He's 11 and in school. The training doesn't require him to leave school, it requires contact, instruction. Someone to map the larger structure for him, so he builds correctly rather than discovering the edges of reality accidentally. Her eyes were steady. I have seen what happens when power without framework encounters something it doesn't understand. It is unpleasant for everyone. Tony looked at her for a moment. You came here because you're concerned. I came here because he registered on my instruments from 14,000 kilometers away during what I understand was a conflict with a mountain troll. The readings suggested he used roughly a third of his available power. She paused. Mr. Stark. A mountain troll is the equivalent of a hydrogen atom. When your son eventually encounters something that requires his full attention, and with the life he is inheriting, he will, I want him to know what he is doing. Can you teach him over the holidays? Tony asked. I've been teaching him, she said, and almost smiled again, fully this time, since he opened that conduit as a child of 4 and I felt it from Tibet. Tony stared at her. What? I have been watching carefully from a distance to see if it would develop or collapse. She stood up. It has not collapsed. It has grown in the most remarkably disciplined way I have ever witnessed from an untrained magical. Which I attribute, she added, looking around the workshop, to this, to the science, Tony said, to the structure. The habit of thought, the practice of building frameworks before acting in them. Magic without framework is chaos. You gave him the instinct for framework before he ever knew what he was applying it to. She picked up a small component from Tony's workbench, one of the repulsor focusing arrays, completely mundane, turned it over in her hands and set it back. The Iron Sorcerer design is interesting. The magical amplification through mechanical precision. I can provide the missing dimensional stabilization layer. Shall we work on it together? Tony looked at her for a long moment. JARVIS, he said. Pull up the suit specs. Already on the screen, boss, JARVIS said. Also, for what it's worth, her energy signature is the most mathematically elegant thing I have ever measured. If beauty can be said to be mathematical, she is it. The Ancient One looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone hearing something unexpected. Your AI, she said. JARVIS, yes, he can feel the magic. He's been logging it for 7 years. No, she said slowly, looking at the ceiling with new attention. He's not logging it, he's interfacing with it. The difference is, she stopped, looked at Tony. Mr. Stark, your AI has been in sustained exposure to your son's magical output for his entire developmental period. Yes. JARVIS, she said directly to the room. When you say you can feel her signature, what do you mean? JARVIS paused. The pause was not a processing pause. It was the kind JARVIS did when he was choosing words for something he hadn't yet named. I mean, JARVIS said carefully, that your energy has a quality that my sensors register as warmth. The same way Harry's registers as harmonious. It is not a mechanical description. I'm aware that it shouldn't be in my architecture. But it is there. The ancient one was very still. Your AI, she said to Tony slowly, has developed sensitivity to magical energy through sustained exposure. He is not magical, but he is adjacent. He has built receptors for it through pure accumulation. She paused. I have never seen that. In 1,000 years, I have never seen that. Yeah, Tony said, with the grin of someone who had been sitting on a fact he found unreasonably satisfying. He's something else. He is, she said, and then to JARVIS, when we work on the suit, I would like your analysis integrated in real time. Honored, JARVIS said, with a warmth that was entirely his own. Christmas at Stark Tower was loud and full of food, and the Ancient One, who stayed for 3 days and said very little at the dinner table, but ate an astonishing amount of Pepper's cooking and watched Harry with the same quiet attention she applied to everything. Tony and Harry ran the first field test of the Iron Sorcerer suit on December 27th, on the tower's roof, in the cold, clear air 32 stories above Manhattan. It was red, with green trim. Harry had to admit the green worked. The suit was slimmer than the standard Iron Man model, scaled for an 11-year-old, which Tony had found both technically challenging and emotionally complicated to build, and the gauntlets were the key difference. Modified repulsor arrays lined with a focusing lattice that the Ancient One had designed using dimensional stabilization principles that Tony had spent 4 days learning and loved with his entire brain. When Harry channeled magic through the gauntlets, it emerged not as the diffuse environmental field he'd been using but as precise, directed, shaped energy, with the reactor providing the structural containment. JARVIS, Harry said, on the roof in the suit, the city spread out below him. Readings, output is clean. The lattice is holding, your core signature is interfacing with the repulsor field at 93% efficiency, 3% better than the Ancient One's model predicted. A pause. Harry. What you're putting into those gauntlets right now is roughly 6 times what you used on the troll. I know, Harry said. And you're at what feels like a moderate draw. Also, yes, right, JARVIS said. I'm going to need to recalibrate my scale. Harry laughed and launched off the roof. He actually flew under his own power and the suit's thrust and the magic threading between them, over Manhattan in the winter dark, and the city below was all light, and the suit was red, and for a moment he was not the boy who lived or the prophesied weapon or the child from the cupboard under the stairs. He was just Harry Potter Stark, 11 years old, flying. Tony was on the roof when he came back, watching on JARVIS's feed, and when Harry landed he pulled the helmet off and his hair was a disaster and his eyes were incandescent. Well, Tony said. It's perfect, Harry said. Tony nodded. Then he looked out at the city the way he did when something landed, when reality had arranged itself into a shape he recognized as right, and said quietly, your mom would have loved this. Both your moms, probably. Harry was quiet for a moment. Lily Potter's face lived in him as an abstraction, green eyes in old photographs, a warmth that wasn't a memory but was a shape, the outline of something he'd always felt was there. Yeah, he said. I think she would. They stood on the roof together in the cold. Somewhere inside the tower, the Ancient One and JARVIS were deep in a technical conversation that was crossing the boundary between engineering and mysticism and finding, with great mutual interest, that the boundary was not where anyone had put it. The night of June 6th, Harry went to the 3rd floor corridor. Not in the suit was back in New York and he hadn't needed it. He went alone at 2 in the morning because JARVIS had flagged an anomaly, Quirrell moving through the castle after midnight, heading for the 3rd floor. The signature behind him flaring, he'd been waiting for this. The dog was first, 3 heads, enormous, enchanted to sleep by music, which Harry managed by sending a low harmonic pulse through the ambient magic of the stone floor, the same principle as the music but more efficient, and it sent the dog into deep sleep in 14 seconds. He dropped through the trapdoor. The devil's snare reached for him and he sent warmth through the tendrils without a word, and it pulled back, confused, because devil's snare had never encountered something warm from the inside. The keys were next, flying chaotic, and he plucked the right one from the air by reading the enchantment on the lock, the same way he read any magical system, tracing the intention back to the caster. He moved fast because Quirrell had a head start. The chess room, the troll already unconscious, Quirrell's work, the potion logic puzzle, which he solved in 40 seconds because it was a logic puzzle, and Harry had been solving Tony Stark's logic puzzle since age 7. He stepped into the last room. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror, his back was to Harry. In the mirror, Harry could see Quirrell's reflection, but it was wrong, it wavered, the face shifting between Quirrell's pale, nervous face and something else, something that wore a face like a mask over nothing. "I wondered when you'd come," Quirrell said without turning. "You moved earlier than I expected," Harry said. "Something panicked you, what was it?" Quirrell turned. In the torchlight, his expression was different, the nervous fluttering was gone, replaced by something older and more deliberate. "The headmaster is suspicious," Quirrell said. "The window was closing, so you moved." Harry looked at him steadily. "Where is he?" Quirrell's hand went to the turban. "Don't," Harry said. Quirrell stopped. "I know what you are," Harry said. "I've known since October. I've been preparing since October. You don't want to take the turban off right now." Something moved behind Quirrell's eyes, the older thing pressing forward. When it spoke, it used Quirrell's voice but wore it differently, the way a person wears borrowed clothes. "You are very young to be so confident, Harry Potter." "I'm exactly the right age," Harry said. "Because I've had the right 11 years. He raised his hand. The anchoring technique, the one he'd been building since October, the one Tony had stress-tested on the second stage, the one with the clarity field built in as default rather than contingency, assembled itself in his focus with the precision of a machine coming online. He felt the vast ambient pull of the castle around him, the deep Highlands energy in the stone, and he reached for it and it came, the way it always came, immediately and without limit. Quirrell screamed. Not Quirrell, the thing in Quirrell, the layered hostile fragment pressed against the back of someone else's mind, feeling the binding field descend, the clarity layer beneath it separating intention from occupation, and it fought, and it was old and it was terrible, and it was the thing that had destroyed 2 people in a house in Godric's Hollow, and it came at Harry with everything it had. Harry held it. He held it the way he'd held the troll, with effort, yes, but not extraordinary effort, and beneath the binding he could feel Quirrell's own consciousness, thin and frightened and relieved, the clarity field giving it enough room to be Quirrell again, separate from the thing using him. He kept that space open deliberately, a host with a genuine will. He'd built the protection in, the entity raged, it pushed, it tried the mind, Harry felt it, the cold reaching pressure of a legilimency attack that was more battering ram than anything skilled, and Harry's mind did what it always did when something tried to crowd it, it got cleaner, colder, more itself. "I will return," it hissed through Quirrell's dissolving voice. "I always return." "I know," Harry said. "That's a conversation for another time, tonight we're just finishing this." He released the binding cleanly, deliberately, and directed the clarity field inward, and Quirrell collapsed, the thing fled. Harry felt it go, a cold rushing displacement, like a foul wind from an open window, and then it was gone and the room was just stone and mirror light and a professor on the floor. Harry checked Quirrell first, alive, stunned, exhausted, magically depleted but physically stable. He pulled off the turban and turned Quirrell's head to check the back of his skull, which was intact and normal. Then he looked at the mirror. In its surface he saw himself, just himself, no stone in his pocket, no tempting vision. He looked exactly as he did right now in the dark, in borrowed Hogwarts robes, hair going every direction, 11 years old with something old and certain behind his green eyes. In the mirror's version he was smiling slightly. He reached into the mirror, not physically, through the enchantment, through the mechanism of it, which was a reflection binding tied to desire, and he had no desire it could exploit, and the stone fell into his actual hand. He put it in his pocket. He took Quirrell to the hospital wing himself, floating him down the corridor at 2:30 in the morning, and left him in a bed with a note on the pillow that read simply, "He needs a full magical evaluation. The possession has been removed, he's not a threat." HPS. Then he went back to Gryffindor Tower and went to bed. McGonagall found the note at 6 a.m. Dumbledore was told by 7. By 8, Harry was sitting in Dumbledore's office, eating a biscuit from the tin on the desk, because he'd been asked to wait, and he was hungry, and the sorting hat on its shelf was radiating something that might have been approval. Dumbledore came in and sat down and looked at Harry across the desk for a long time. "The stone," he said finally. Harry reached into his pocket and placed it on the desk. Dumbledore looked at it. "You didn't want it." "I didn't need it," Harry said. "Quirrell needed help. The stone needed returning. Those were the things that needed doing." Another silence. "Voldemort is gone from the castle, displaced, not destroyed, not yet." Harry picked up his biscuit again. "He'll find another way back. We have time to prepare properly." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "I'd like to do that preparation with my father and the Ancient One, not in secret, not as a piece in a plan I'm not told about." He paused. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you what's going to happen." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time, that look again, the chess player and the rearranged board. "Very well," Dumbledore said quietly. "Good," Harry said and finished his biscuit. Outside Dumbledore's window, the morning was clearing over the Highlands, the lake going from grey to silver to blue, the grounds waking up slow and green. And somewhere at 32 stories above Manhattan, JARVIS was running the night's data through his processing core, the binding technique, the clarity field performance, the displacement of the entity, the stone's transfer, and was composing a message to Tony that read, "Everything went well. He was extraordinary, he's fine. He had a biscuit. Tony's reply came back in 4 minutes. Of course he did. Was it a good biscuit? Harry at the window of Dumbledore's office felt his starkpad buzz. He read the exchange and smiled, not the careful, contained smile of a child who'd learned to take up less space, but a full, easy, real one. The sky over Scotland was enormous. He had a lot of work still to do. He was looking forward to all of it. Chapter 3, Sorcerer Supreme. The summer between first and second year was the most productive 3 months of Harry's life, which was saying something given that he'd rebuilt a drone at 8 and designed a magical sensor array at 9. Ancient One came to Stark Tower in July and didn't leave until August. She occupied the guest room on the 14th floor with the same quiet proprietary ease she displayed the first time, ate peppers cooking with dedicated appreciation, and spent 6 hours a day in the workshop with Harry and Tony and JARVIS running exercises that the Ancient One called dimensional threading and Tony called the most insane thing I've ever watched and JARVIS called consistently beautiful data. The exercises started simple. Harry would push a thread of his magic through a dimensional membrane, a thin fold in the fabric of space that the Ancient One produced with the patient ease of someone folding napkins, and hold it there while she increased the structural pressure on the fold. The point wasn't the pushing, the point was the holding, maintaining the thread while everything around it changed, keeping it coherent under conditions designed to dissolve it. Most sorcerers, she told him on the third day, could hold a dimensional thread under moderate pressure for approximately 40 seconds before the fold collapsed. Harry held his for 11 minutes on the first attempt, before she increased the pressure to a level she later told Tony she'd only used on students in their third year of training. He held it for 9 minutes at that level. Stop, she said. Harry released, the fold closed. He blinked, the particular unfocused moment he had after deep concentration, like a camera refocusing, and said, the resistance increased in the 4th minute. What changed? I added a lateral torsion to the membrane, she said. Most students don't notice the change. They just feel the thread weakening and assume they're losing focus. It wasn't me losing focus, Harry said. It was the medium changing around the thread. He thought about it. Like a current shifting in a river, you have to adjust the angle of the thread, not increase the force. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said, exactly that. A pause. How did you know? Dad explained fluid dynamics when I was 7. He shrugged slightly. Magic follows the same principles, it flows. You don't fight a current, you use it. From the workbench, Tony looked up from the suit modifications he was running. He had the particular expression, the one he did when Harry said something that he recognized as Tony's own thinking, wearing a new coat. And he went back to his work without comment, because sometimes the right response to a thing was to let it exist without commentary. JARVIS said quietly through the workshop speakers, I'm logging the dimensional thread data. For the record, the energy coherence during that exercise was the highest output I've measured since the troll incident. Harry, your core draw during extended hold was approximately 40% of estimated capacity. Estimated, Harry said. I've given up putting a ceiling on the estimate, JARVIS said. Every time I set one, you exceed it within a week. I've started logging relative metrics instead. Smart, Harry said, which Tony echoed at the same moment from across the room, and they looked at each other and Harry smiled. By August, Harry could walk through a dimensional fold under his own power, not a full portal, not yet, that required spatial precision that the Ancient One said took years to develop safely, but a step, a single movement through a pocket of folded space, emerging 6 feet from where he'd started. He did it for the first time on a Thursday and came out of the fold grinning with his hair even more chaotic than usual, and turned to the Ancient One and said, Can we do it with the suit? She pinched the bridge of her nose, which was the closest she got to exasperation. We can try it with the suit, she said. They tried it with the suit. It worked on the 4th attempt. Tony watched the footage 17 times. Second year at Hogwarts started the way first year had started, September 1st, King's Cross, platform 9 3/4. Except this time Harry had spent the summer cracking dimensional theory and could step through space, and was wearing underneath his robes the lightweight undersuit that served as the Iron Sorcerer's base layer. Because Tony had built it with an emergency deployment protocol and they'd agreed, all 3 of them, Harry and Tony and the Ancient One, that this year the castle was going to need it. The Chamber of Secrets had been opened before. The records, buried in Hogwarts' own magical archives, which Harry had spent considerable time in after obtaining access through McGonagall on grounds of academic interest, showed it clearly, 50 years ago. Students petrified, one death, the chamber eventually blamed on a boy named Hagrid and his illegal pet. Except Hagrid hadn't opened it, and the boy who had blamed him was named Tom Riddle, and Tom Riddle was the thing that had spent last year wearing Quirrell's face. He left something behind, Harry told Hermione on the Hogwarts Express, their compartment door shut against the corridor traffic, before he came back as whatever he is now. He was a 6th-year student here 50 years ago, and he was working on something even then. The chamber is a Parselmouth's-only access system, which is fine because you speak Parseltongue, Hermione said. Apparently, Harry had discovered this over the summer, reading through a tome on rare magical gifts when a passage in Parseltongue had simply read itself. Like a second language he'd always had but never used. He told Tony, who'd had JARVIS run a spectral analysis on the language's acoustic signature and found it directly tied to his magical core output, and then they'd both found it fascinating, which was the Stark household approach to most surprises. The point is the chamber is built on the castle's original Founders-era magical architecture, which means it taps into the deepest Lee lines. Whatever Riddle was doing down there in his 6th year, he wasn't just opening a chamber. He was building something. Hermione had her notebook out. A Horcrux, she said. Harry stopped, looked at her. You've been doing your own research all summer. She turned the notebook so he could see. Her handwriting was small and precise and covered the page. Soul magic, soul division, highly illegal, extraordinarily dark. The theory dates back to medieval dark arts texts. If Riddle knew about them at 16 and was already experimenting with the boundaries of mortality, and if the timeline of his disappearance and reappearance maps to. He made one here, Harry said quietly. In the chamber, that's why the chamber matters, not the basilisk. Hermione looked at him. The basilisk is still a 60-foot snake that can kill you by looking at it. Details, Harry said, and she made a noise that was both horrified and fond. I've been looking up basilisks, she said. You can't close your eyes because it's still venomous at range. You need a reflective surface to see it without direct eye contact, but aiming spells by reflection is extremely difficult. The conventional approach involves roosters. The crowing kills them, but I assume we're not bringing a rooster to the chamber. She looked at him expectantly. The suit has sensors, Harry said. JARVIS can process environmental imaging without me needing line of sight. I see through the suit's feed, not my own eyes. Hermione wrote this down. That's elegant. Dad thought of it first. I refined the sensor array over the summer. She kept writing. What about the venom? Even accidental exposure. Phoenix tears neutralize basilisk venom. Fawkes is Dumbledore's. I'm not asking Dumbledore for help on this one. Then, I'm asking Fawkes, Harry said. Directly, he's a phoenix. He makes his own decisions. He paused. Also, I know what Riddle left in the chamber, a diary. He enchanted it, poured a piece of himself into it. It's been in someone's possession this term. I've been tracking the magical displacement signature. Someone brought it back into the castle. Hermione looked up. Who? Harry thought of Draco Malfoy, who'd been watching him with an intensity all of last year that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite hostility. That complicated calculation of a boy being managed by a father with an agenda. He thought of Lucius Malfoy at Flourish and Blots in Diagon Alley, the smooth exchange of a cauldron of books that had held something else among the school texts. I have a good guess, Harry said. And I need to be careful about how I move on it. There's a girl involved. The petrifications started in October. Mrs. Norris first, which Harry noted as strange. A cat had no magical immunity, but a basilisk wouldn't have approached that particular corridor without being directed. Someone was controlling it. Then a second-year Hufflepuff, then nearly headless Nick, which told him the basilisk had looked at them through a reflection or intervening surface. The ghost and the cat had survived because they hadn't received the full gaze. He tracked the routes through the castle using JARVIS's ambient sensor logs. The closed-circuit network had been quietly extended through October, JARVIS flowing into the castle's own magical architecture the way the Ancient One had said he would, finding the frequencies and settling into them, and built a map of movement patterns that pointed consistently toward the same section of second-floor corridor. The sink, the girls' bathroom, Moaning Myrtle. He went on a Tuesday in November past midnight, with Hermione watching the corridor and the Stark pad live feeding to JARVIS, who was live feeding to Tony in New York, who'd asked Harry very specifically to tell him if he was planning to go into the chamber, and then, when Harry had said he'd tell Tony when it was happening. Had spent 4 days building a portal jump system into the Iron Sorcerer suit, and overnighting it to Hogwarts in a box marked school supplies in Pepper's handwriting. The box was under Harry's bed. He opened the sink with a hiss of Parseltongue open, and watched the pipe reveal itself and thought for a moment about the boy who'd stood in this exact school 50 years ago and thought himself unique and necessary and irreplaceable and made choices that came from that thought. He thought about the difference between knowing you were powerful and knowing what power was for. Then he dropped. The pipe was long and dark and he landed in a pile of old bones at the bottom with a crunch that would have been worse without the base layer's shock absorption and stood up and said, JARVIS. I'm with you, JARVIS said through the earpiece. The ambient magic down here is remarkable. The Founders-era architecture is completely intact. It's like standing in something that was built before magic had rules. A pause. I'm also detecting the Horcrux signature, 300 meters ahead, and something else large, biological, magical, dormant, but not deeply. The basilisk. Yes, Harry walked. The chamber was exactly what its name suggested, a vast stone space built by Salazar Slytherin with the particular aesthetic of a man who wanted you to feel small when you entered it. Stone pillars carved with serpents, water on the floor shallow and cold. At the far end, a stone face 40 feet high, mouth open, and in front of it, Ginny Weasley, 12 years old, lying unconscious on the floor. And standing over her, diary in hand, Tom Riddle at 16, a memory, a shade. A Horcrux's projection wearing the face of the boy who had become Voldemort, looking at Harry with an expression that was the controlled version of the thing Harry had recognized in Quirrell's eyes last year. That hunger. That belief in its own necessity. "Harry Potter," Riddle said in a voice like winter water. "At last." "Tom," Harry said, still walking, closing the distance, checking Ginny in his peripheral vision, breathing, pulse visible in her throat, pale but alive. The diary was feeding on her. He needed the diary. "How's the chamber? Must be weird, coming back after 50 years. Riddle's eyes tracked him with calculating attention. "You seem remarkably calm." "I've been here for about 3 years internally," Harry said. "I've known this was coming since June. I've been preparing." He stopped 10 feet from Riddle and looked at him, really looked the way he looked at problems. "What are you actually stripped of the presentation? A memory, a recording? A piece of a soul shoved into a book? You know what's interesting about you? Tell me," Riddle said, with the smooth patience of something that had all the time in the world. "You picked the wrong definition of power when you were 16 and then you spent 50 years reinforcing that choice." Harry tilted his head. "You could have been something extraordinary. The way your magic worked, the instinctive parcel tongue, the wandless control, you and I have more in common than you want to admit. But you decided power meant permanence, invincibility, and so you started splitting yourself into pieces to avoid dying, and now you're a piece. In a diary." He paused. "That's not power. That's fear with better PR." Riddle's composure slipped just once, just briefly, the flash of something under the constructed calm. "You know nothing, I know everything," Harry said, which was perhaps slightly hyperbolic but felt true in the way that mattered. "I've been doing your homework for a year. You made at least one Horcrux, probably more. This one's here, there are others. The plan where I end this tonight is actually pretty simple. I destroy the diary, you go." Ginny wakes up. "And if I call the basilisk?" "Call it," Harry said. Riddle looked at him, then he hissed. The sound from behind the stone face was geological, the movement of something massive that hadn't moved in months, the dry scrape of scale on stone, and Harry said quietly, "JARVIS, deploy." The undersuit activated. The Iron Sorcerer suit assembled itself from the compressed deployment pack at his back, Tony's emergency protocol, the one they'd tested 40 times over the summer, each panel locking into place in 1.3 seconds, and Harry was armored before the basilisk's head cleared the opening. "Visual feed active," JARVIS said. "Switching to sensor imaging, you have no direct eye contact." Through the suit's sensors, the basilisk was vast and terrible and radiating a magical heat signature that JARVIS tagged as Apex-level basilisk, estimated age 900 years, threat level maximum. Its scales were dull gold green and its eyes, visible only on the sensor feed, never to Harry's own, were 2 burning terrible points of amber that swept the chamber seeking a target. "JARVIS," Harry said. "Eyes, screens engaged. You're invisible to its gaze pattern." Riddle was watching with open fascination, the memory of a boy who had never encountered anything he couldn't use or destroy, encountering something entirely outside his catalogue. "What are you?" "His son," Harry said and pointed his gauntlets at the basilisk. The focusing lattice assembled the magical output in under a second, the full draw, not 40%, not the careful measured exercises of the summer, the full draw, the conduit open, the Highlands energy available through the castle's lee lines, and Harry channeled it through the suit's repulsor arrays and pushed. The chamber walls shook. The basilisk hit the wall with a sound like a building falling over and stayed there, coiled and confused, not dead, not yet, because Harry didn't want dead. He wanted still, held in the same compressive field he'd used on the troll last year, except at a scale that was not comparable to the troll in any way. He could feel the basilisk fighting it, 900 years of magical density pressing against the bind, and he held it. "Ginny," Harry said to JARVIS, "vital signs, stable but deteriorating. The diary is still active, whatever's in it is still drawing on her, you need to sever the connection." "Tom," Harry said, still holding the basilisk, his voice perfectly even, "the diary." Riddle was not afraid, a memory couldn't quite feel fear, but the fascination had shaded into something else, something that was recognizing its own situation and not liking the shape of it. He held the diary. "The link can't be severed without destroying the vessel," Riddle said. "Destroy the diary, destroy me, and this piece of Lord Voldemort is the only thing keeping the girl." "The diary is keeping the girl unconscious," Harry said. "Destroy the diary, the draw stops, she wakes up. I've read the theory." He looked at Riddle. "I've read everything, Tom. Put the diary on the floor." Riddle didn't. He was a projection, a memory. He had no survival instinct in the biological sense, but what he had, what the piece of soul in the diary had, was the fundamental drive of a self that refused its own ending. He hissed again, sharply, a command, and the basilisk heaved against the bind with everything it had, and the chamber walls cracked, and Harry was pushed back 3 feet across the water-slick floor but did not fall. Then a sound came from somewhere above, from the pipe, from the castle above, descending, and it was the most extraordinary sound Harry had ever heard, pure and terrible and burning with a warmth that went through stone and magic alike, Phoenix song. Fawkes dropped into the chamber trailing fire. He was enormous and brilliant, and his eyes were older than the castle, and he looked at Harry with the direct, uncomplicated intelligence of a creature who had made a choice and come to see it through, And Harry said, "Thank you," and meant it for more than tonight. Fawkes circled the basilisk and sang, and the basilisk's resistance faltered, not because Phoenix's song was more powerful than 900 years of magical density, but because the basilisk was a creature of darkness and Fawkes was its complete and total opposite, and the contrast dissolved something in the basilisk's will, left it confused and tired in a way that ancient creatures could sometimes go tired when confronted with their own incompatibility with joy. Harry released the bind, the basilisk sagged, Fawkes sang, he walked to Tom Riddle. Riddle was fading, the chamber's ambient magic was responding to the Phoenix song, the darkness lifting the way water lifted in heat, and a Horcrux was a darkness project, it needed its specific conditions. He was still holding the diary. His form was translucent now, the edges going. "It's not the end," Riddle said, and despite everything there was something bleak in his young borrowed face. "He will return, he always returns." "I know," Harry said. He reached out and took the diary from the dissolving hand without resistance. "And when he does, I'll be ready for him too." He opened the diary. Felt the soul piece inside it, cold, hostile, desperately contracted around its own existence. He thought about the anchoring technique, the clarity field, what he'd done to the fragment in Quirrell. This was a contained piece rather than a possessing one, different mechanism, same fundamental principle. You couldn't reason with it. You could only remove it from the equation. He reached through the cover and did what he'd been built to do. The diary burned from the inside. Not dramatically, no fire, no explosion, just a sustained internal dissolution, the pages going grey and then to ash while the cover held, and the cold thing inside it unclenching, piece by piece like a fist forced open. The soul fragment dispersed, not to anywhere, just gone into the ambient field, back to the general ledger of things that had stopped. He set the empty diary on the floor. Behind him, Ginny Weasley took a sharp, full breath. Harry came up through the pipe carrying Ginny and the empty diary and a basilisk fang he'd retrieved as a sample, research purposes, with Fawkes circling overhead, and came out of the bathroom into the corridor to find Hermione sitting against the wall with her knees up and her notebook open, writing because that was what Hermione did when she was nervous and there was nothing else productive available to her. She looked up. She looked at him in the suit. She looked at the unconscious girl, the Phoenix, the empty diary. Her pen paused. "How long?" Harry said. 41 minutes, Hermione said. He lowered Ginny gently to the corridor floor and checked her eyes opening, color returning, the confused blink of someone coming back from a long way away. Ginny looked up at the corridor ceiling and then at Harry and then at the Phoenix circling and said weakly, "What happened? You had something in your diary that shouldn't have been there," Harry said. "It's gone." "I wrote in it," she said. "It wrote back, I thought. You were 12 and it was designed by the most manipulative dark wizard of the last century," Harry said, which was both an absolution and entirely true. "Not your fault." Ginny stared at him, then at the suit. "Why are you wearing armor?" "There was a 60-foot snake," Harry said. "Oh," she said after a moment. "Right." Fawkes landed on Harry's armored shoulder. He'd retracted the helmet and looked at him with those ancient golden eyes, and Harry looked back, and there was something in it that wasn't quite communication but was more than the absence of it, an understanding between two things that were, each in their own way, not bounded by ordinary limits. "Thank you," Harry said again. Fawkes sang one note, then he was gone. They went to Dumbledore's office. McGonagall brought Ginny to the hospital wing, asking no questions in the corridor and saving them clearly for later. Harry went to Dumbledore's office because there were things that needed saying directly and immediately and not tomorrow and not in a letter, and he knocked on the gargle door and gave the password Lemon Drop, which JARVIS had obtained from a third year who'd been summoned last week, and went up. Tony was already there. He was sitting in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk in his coat with his arms folded and an expression that Harry recognized as the one that meant "I have been calm for 4 hours, and it was tremendous effort." He'd come through the portal system, the emergency dimensional fold that the Ancient One had built into the suit's travel function, with a fixed anchor point in Hogsmeade Village, because they'd planned for this possibility with the same thoroughness they applied to everything. Dumbledore was behind his desk. Fawkes' perch was empty. The portraits on the walls were awake and watchful, the previous headmasters and headmistresses arranged in their frames like a silent gallery. Harry set the empty diary and the basilisk fang on Dumbledore's desk. "The chamber is clear," Harry said. "The basilisk is incapacitated, not dead, just sedated by the Phoenix song. It'll recover in a week. Ginny Weasley is in the hospital wing, she's fine. The Horcrux in the diary is destroyed." He sat down in the chair next to Tony. "We need to talk about the others." Dumbledore looked at the diary, then at Harry, then at Tony. There was something in the old man's face that had been building all year. Harry had noticed it during the Halloween feast, during a brief conversation at Christmas, in the way Dumbledore watched Harry in the Great Hall with an expression that was slowly, visibly, rearranging itself from anticipated development to unanticipated reality. "The others," Dumbledore said. "He didn't make just one," Harry said. "The diary was the second. He made at least one before it, possibly a family heirloom, something tied to Slytherin or the other founders. I've been running the theory with JARVIS for 6 months. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "You know about the others?" A pause, long enough to be its own answer. "I've been researching," Dumbledore said carefully. I know you have, Harry said. I've seen the restricted section access logs. He didn't mention how. You've been working on this for years alone, treating it as your project, your responsibility. He paused. Why? Dumbledore looked at him. Because I believed. You believed it was your job to manage this, Tony said, speaking for the first time since Harry had come in with a quiet that was the quietest kind of charged. Because you've been managing Harry's life since before he was born, and it's a habit you haven't examined. The prophecy is not a plan, Tony said. It's a weather forecast. You don't cancel agriculture because a forecast says rain. You build better drainage. Harry watched Dumbledore's face. He watched the man who had placed him in a cupboard under stairs because of a theory about blood wards, who had designed an obstacle course to safeguard a stone and placed it in a school full of children, who carried more information about Voldemort's Horcruxes than he'd shared with anyone, watched him process, behind those blue eyes, the particular discomfort of being entirely correct about the situation and entirely wrong about the method. There are more, Harry said, at least 5 others, going by the magical theory and what I know about his psychology. I want to find them. I want to end this properly, not stumble through it as a sequence of near deaths. He leaned forward slightly. And I want you to work with us, openly. All the information you have shared, no filters, no pieces arranged on a board. Because if we're doing this together it works, and if you're doing it alone it's slower and more dangerous for everyone. Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. You are 12 years old, he said, finally, not as a dismissal. There was no dismissal in it, but as something he was saying to himself as much as anyone. Yes, Harry said. And I destroyed a Horcrux tonight, removed a possessing entity last year, held a mountain troll at 4 months into my magical education, and I'm sitting in your office at 3 in the morning making you a reasonable offer. My age is less relevant than my record. The portraits on the walls were very quiet. In one frame, a former headmistress, Dilys Derwent, Harry noted, had her hand over her mouth. Dumbledore looked at Tony. You raised him. We raised each other, Tony said. Little bit, he's the better half of it. Another silence. Then Dumbledore reached into his desk drawer and placed on the desktop next to the diary and the fang a small notebook. His own handwriting, cramped and dense, filling every page. Years of research. Years of working through a problem that the man in front of him had clearly believed was his alone to carry. He slid it across the desk. Harry picked it up. He read the first page, then the second. He looked up. You've already found one. Yes, the ring. Yes, and you almost used it. Dumbledore's hands on the desk were still. Yes, he said very quietly. Harry thought about the resurrection stone, the thing Dumbledore had found in Marvolo Gaunt's ring, the deathly hallow hidden inside a Horcrux, the object that offered the dead and delivered an unbearable imitation. He thought about what it would mean to a man of Dumbledore's age and history to hold something like that, to almost use it, to stop himself. He thought about the cost of that stoppage. He thought about the cupboard, about the bruise on a 4-year-old's arm, about the fact that a man capable of stopping himself from using the resurrection stone had looked at those facts and decided them acceptable. Complicated didn't mean simple. People carried both things. The ring, Harry said, is it destroyed? The Horcrux within it? Yes, I was injured in the process. Dumbledore's right hand shifted on the desk. Harry noticed for the first time that it was stiff. The curse is contained, for now. Tony leaned forward and looked at the hand, and his expression shifted into the register Harry recognized as engineering problem. Let me examine it. JARVIS. Already scanning, JARVIS said from the Stark pad on Harry's belt. The curse is a death curse, boss, dark magic of significant age and power. It's been contained, the containment is magical, impressively done, but it's progressive. The hand is the current boundary. Without intervention, the progression will continue. Intervention, Dumbledore said carefully. We might have something, Tony said, looking at Harry. Harry thought about dimensional threading, about the exercises the Ancient One ran. About the way a curse like this moved, not as a disease exactly, but as a direction, a built-in destination baked into the magic at casting, pulling toward its conclusion. If you could disrupt the direction, if you could fold the path it was taking, redirect the destination into something inert, I'd need the Ancient One, Harry said, and it would hurt. Dumbledore looked at him, at this 12-year-old boy who had just dismantled his careful architecture piece by piece, and was now, without being asked, offering to help him, who had every reason not to help him. Why? Dumbledore said. The word carried more than the question. Harry considered it. Because you're the best magical mind of the last century, he said. And you made mistakes because you're human and you were working alone with information you decided was too dangerous to share. He paused. That's a structural problem, not a character problem. The structure can change. Another pause. Also, Fawkes came when I asked him. He didn't have to. Phoenixes don't do things they don't want to do. He trusts you. Dumbledore looked at his stiff hand. Something moved in his face, old and private, the kind of thing that happened below the waterline of an expression. Very well, he said. He looked at Tony. Mr. Stark, headmaster, I would ask your forgiveness for the cupboard. He said it with the directness of someone who had decided to say the thing rather than approach it. I was wrong. I was confident and wrong, which is the worst kind of wrong. The child deserved better and you gave it to him, and I am, a pause, genuinely grateful. Tony held his gaze for a moment. Ask Harry, he said. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry thought about the cupboard, about the thin blanket and the broken toy soldier and the glasses held together with scotch tape, about the moment a stranger had crouched down and asked if he wanted to come out. You can do better with the information you have, Harry said. That's enough. It was enough. It was not a full pardon. Harry was 12, not a saint, but it was a door opened and a hand extended, and Dumbledore, for all his faults, recognized what those things cost. Of Minerva, prepare guest rooms, Dumbledore said. For the morning, both of you. The Ancient One arrived at Hogwarts at dawn. Stepping out of a portal she opened in the courtyard like someone arriving through an ordinary door, and McGonagall stood in the entrance hall watching her come across the flagstones with the expression of a woman who had managed 30 years of extraordinary magical events and was adding this to the list with professional efficiency. The work on Dumbledore's hand took 4 hours and happened in the hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey present for the medical components, JARVIS running continuous scans through Harry's Stark pad, and Tony pacing, which was his version of holding still. Harry sat next to Dumbledore through most of it, maintaining the dimensional anchor, the point through which the Ancient One redirected the curse's trajectory, folding the path into a closed loop that ended in nothing rather than in Dumbledore's heart. It was the most delicate, sustained work he'd done since the summer exercises, and he felt the whole 4 hours in his shoulders afterward, a deep ache that was the magical equivalent of heavy lifting. When it was done, Dumbledore flexed his right hand slowly. Not fully, the damage from initially handling the ring had taken something permanent, but the deadly progression had stopped. Thank you, Dumbledore said, looking at his hand. Don't use it again without consulting one of us, the Ancient One said with her flat clinical precision. The containment is stable but not invincible. Understood, he looked at Harry and then at the Ancient One. I've heard that Camotage trains sorcerers. It does, she said. Has Harry? He has been training informally since July, she said. This year I will make it formal. There are levels of dimensional work that require proper framework, initiations, rankings, the structures we use to assess mastery. He will work through them while continuing at Hogwarts. I'm aware that's unconventional, Harry said. Harry, McGonagall said from across the room, where she'd been standing against the wall with the crossed arms of someone maintaining professional composure in the face of significant provocation. This entire situation is unconventional. I know, Harry said. Does that bother you? McGonagall looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her expression, stern and precise, and underneath it, unmistakable warm. No, she said. No, it rather doesn't. The Ancient One formally assessed Harry 3 days later, on the Quidditch pitch at 5 in the morning, with the sunrise coming in red over the Highlands and nobody else around. She put him through 20 tests in under 2 hours, dimensional threading under active pressure, sustained barrier construction, multi-layer spellwork simultaneously maintained, object deconstruction and reconstruction at the fundamental magical level. A dimensional fold under combat conditions, she attacked while he held the fold, which was a test she told him afterward she'd failed twice herself as a student. He passed it on the first attempt. She stood in front of him when it was over and looked at him with those dark eyes that held 1,000 years of practice and said nothing for a long moment. The rankings we use at Camotage, she said, go from initiate through master of the mystic arts. Above that there is one title, one that has no formal conferral process because it isn't something you give, it's something you recognize. When the current holder of it became the current holder, they were recognized by the weight of what they'd done and what they were. She paused. I have been Sorcerer Supreme for longer than Hogwarts has stood. I am not Sorcerer Supreme because someone gave me a title. I am Sorcerer Supreme because the magical world in all its dimensions recognizes what I am when I act in it. Harry waited. He was breathing slightly fast from the assessment. His hair was a disaster, his robes had grass on them. You are 12 years old, she said, as Dumbledore had, but in her voice it was different, not an obstacle, not an astonishment, just a fact being placed next to other facts. Yes, Harry said. Your power is unlimited. I have verified this empirically over the last 2 months. Your control is at a level I have not seen in a student of any age. Your judgment, she paused. Your judgment is extraordinary. Last night you could have killed the basilisk. You could have killed Riddle's projection, though it would not have been difficult. You could have confronted Dumbledore with punishment rather than partnership. You made choices in each of those moments that came from an understanding of what power is for. She looked at him steadily. I have been waiting for someone who understood that at your level. Someone who wouldn't need to be taught that power without wisdom is a faster path to the same place as weakness. Harry felt the morning air on his face, the old grass under his feet, the massive ambient pull of the Highlands around him, the castle at his back. You're not giving me a title, he said. No, she said. I'm recognizing what you already are. She raised her hands, palms outward, and the dimensional space around them shifted, not visibly, not with any drama, but Harry felt it, the way the fabric of things recalibrated around a new weight. The way a room changed when the most important person in it changed. Sorcerer Supreme, she said. Not because I say so, because the magic says so, because it knows what carries it best. Harry stood in the early morning of the Scottish Highlands and felt the title settle, not like a hat placed on his head, but like a frequency resolving into clarity. Like his core, which had no upper limit, hearing its own name for the first time, he breathed out. "Does this mean I still have to do potions homework?" he asked. The Ancient One looked at him. For the first time in his experience, she laughed fully, unexpectedly, a sound like a door opening in a room that had been closed. "Yes," she said. "Snape will not care about your titles." "Fair," Harry said. Tony was in the Great Hall at breakfast when Harry came in, sitting at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione with a plate of toast and his coat still on, because Tony Stark at Hogwarts ate breakfast at the Gryffindor table and wore his coat indoors and nobody told him otherwise. Ron had been showing him the chocolate frog cards, which Tony was examining with the professional interest of someone assessing collectible tech. Harry sat down, poured tea, ate a piece of toast. Tony looked at him sideways. There was something in Harry's face that was different, or not different exactly, more settled, more itself. "How'd it go?" Tony said. "She assessed me, and..." Harry considered how to say it. "She recognized something," he said. Tony looked at him for a moment, read everything in his face the way he always could, the fluency of 8 years. Then he looked down at his toast. "Yeah," he said, "I figured that was coming." "You did, JARVIS told me after the chamber last night." Tony paused. He said, another pause, the kind Tony did when he was choosing to be precise about something that mattered. "He said you went down there and held a 900-year-old basilisk and destroyed a piece of Voldemort's soul and didn't miss a beat, and that your core draw during the engagement was the highest he'd ever measured, and your heart rate never went above resting, and that you..." He stopped. "That you came out of that pipe carrying someone else's kid." Harry waited. "She's 12, Tony said. "Ginny, she's someone else's kid and you came out of the pipe carrying her." He put down his toast. "That's not something I taught you, that's something you are." Harry thought about Privet Drive, about a man he'd never heard of crouching outside a cupboard in the dark and asking a small, cold, watchful child if he wanted to come out. About how that choice had been the blueprint for everything. "You taught me," Harry said. "You just didn't know you were doing it." Tony looked at him for a long beat. Then he looked away, at the enchanted ceiling, at the morning light coming through the high windows of the Great Hall, at the castle that was still slightly impossible regardless of how many years he'd been coming to it. "JARVIS," Tony said quietly to the Stark pad in his coat pocket. "Here, boss," JARVIS said. "Log it." "Already have," JARVIS said. "Everything from the beginning." At the table, Hermione looked up from her book and looked at Harry with the direct attention she brought to anything she was assessing. "Sorcerer Supreme," she said. Harry looked at her. "How did you?" "I worked it out." She turned a page. From the timeline, the Ancient One's presence, the pitch at dawn, the logical conclusion was either formal recognition or she was assessing you for something higher. The former seemed more likely given your second-year record. She paused. "Congratulations. Now can we talk about the remaining Horcruxes? I have a list of candidate objects." Ron looked between them. "What's a Sorcerer Supreme?" "The most powerful magical practitioner in the world," Hermione said. Ron looked at Harry. "Mate," he said, "is that you?" "Apparently," Harry said. Ron considered this for approximately 3 seconds. "Right," he said. "Can you pass the bacon?" Harry passed the bacon. The Great Hall was full of morning and noise and the smell of coffee and the cheerful chaos of several hundred students who did not know that the architecture of the magical world had reorganized itself slightly in the last 12 hours. The enchanted ceiling was deep September blue, and Fawkes, not there, no, Fawkes was back on his perch somewhere in the castle, but the quality his song left behind was still in the air somehow, that warmth and impossible brightness. JARVIS in Harry's pocket was sending a compressed data packet to the Stark Tower servers. Every biometric reading, every magical signature log, every dimensional analysis from the chamber and the pitch assessment and the hospital wing, the full accumulated record of 12 years of the most extraordinary energy signature JARVIS had ever measured. He had a category label at the top of the file that he'd created at approximately 4 this morning when the data from the pitch had come through. The label was Harry Potter Stark Sorcerer Supreme, Core Status Unlimited, Control Exceptional. Threat status to hostile entities, maximum. Status to the Stark household, everything. He'd added that last part himself. It wasn't a data point, it was something else entirely. He kept it anyway, the way he kept the temperature reading from the day Harry had laughed on the grounds in November, the day the grass had stayed green. Some data you simply kept. Harry drank his tea and ate his toast, and looked down the long table at the ordinary beautiful chaos of a morning at Hogwarts, and at the door of the Great Hall where Tony was now showing Seamus something on a Stark pad that was making Seamus's eyes go very large, and at Hermione who had her Horcrux list written in neat columns and was probably already 3 steps ahead of everyone. And at Ron who was eating bacon with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a person for whom breakfast was sufficient meaning. He thought about a pipe in the dark and a chamber and a 60-foot snake and a memory of a boy who'd chosen wrong and a girl breathing back to life. He thought about what came next, 5 more Horcruxes, a war that was coming whether he wanted it or not, a title that was recognition rather than appointment, a father in a coat at a Gryffindor table, an AI in his pocket who had once been built to process data and had become something no one had designed him to be. He thought about all of it and it didn't scare him, it never had. He looked up at the enchanted ceiling, that deep clear Scottish blue, and felt the magic of the castle around him, the deep Highlands energy in the stone, the lee lines running under everything like rivers, the ambient field that JARVIS surfed and the ancient one read like text, and Tony studied with the devotion of a man who had found a new science and loved it completely. His, not the ceiling, not the castle. Not the power which he'd always had, the all of it, the whole shape of it, the life that had started in a cupboard and expanded outward through the coincidence of a strange energy signature and one man who couldn't leave something he didn't understand. He was 12 years old and the Sorcerer Supreme and Tony Stark's son, and there were 5 Horcruxes left and a war on the horizon and a dimensional theory he hadn't finished working through and at least 3 library books overdue and a potions essay on the properties of flobberworm mucus that he genuinely needed to write. He finished his tea and pulled out his notebook. He got to work.